in Paris. I was 15 years old, traveling with a dozen or so other Hawaiian high school students. That trip, my first out of the country, was thrilling. I had my retainer stolen from my backpack by a pickpocket in Madrid, and my passport stolen in Paris. It wasn't really stolen. My best friend thought it was her passport and just packed it in her suitcase. This is all to say, many things escaped my cloistered teenage brain on that trip, including the work of Theodore Géricault. Visiting the Louvre, I'm lucky I remember to get an early selfie with the Mona Lisa, shot on a wind-up disposable camera. If I had been paying attention, I couldn't have missed Jericho's The Raft of the Medusa. It's massive, 16 feet by 23 feet. In the painting, a life raft is tossed on a stormy sea. It's a fragile vessel made of battered wooden boards and a sail that seems far too small for the job. The raft is piled high with bodies, some still alive, some dead. Some of the living people wave frantically at a distant ship, while others seem resigned to their grim fate. An older man in the foreground gently cradles his arm around a dead body. And the corpses, well, they're good corpses. Their skin is waxy and realistic, heads thrown back, mouths hanging open, legs splayed out with a convincing post-mortem stiffness. Jericho based the painting on a real shipwreck of a French naval frigate from 1816. After being lost at sea for nearly 2 weeks, only 10 of the 150 crew members survived. During Jericho's extensive preparation to create the painting, he not only interviewed and sketched the survivors of the wreck, but he even had a life-sized recreation of the raft constructed to use as a model. When the painting debuted in 1819, just a few years later, viewers still remembered the tales of desperation and cannibalism that they had heard or read about the tragedy. It was kind of like someone today painting the destruction of Hurricane Maria or the Parkland shooting. That is to say, it was still very fresh in people's minds. So you got the survivors, you got the life-sized raft. How do you realistically represent decaying corpses to really drive home the scene? Well, you go get some decaying corpses. That's how. Jericho filled his studio with limbs and other bits of bodies that he borrowed from hospitals and morgues in Paris. He was particularly interested in corpses of those who had drowned. He visited the hospital Beaujon to witness patients dying and to further examine the putrefaction of the dead in its morgue. His pièce de résistance was a severed head he acquired from a nearby lunatic asylum that he took to the roof of his studio so as to study its features. By exhaustively sketching and painting the dead and dying, he hoped to accurately portray what happens to humans after they die. The completed raft of the Medusa was displayed at the 1819 Paris Salon to mixed reviews. Some were appalled, calling it nothing but a pile of corpses, which, to be fair, it was. Others were stunned by its detail, showing the human form in all its states, living, dead, almost dead. Critic Gustave Planche marveled at how in one slumped figure in the foreground, quote, all the parts of this corpse are rendered with an amazing and frightening fidelity. Jericho wanted people to feel the visceral terror of being hopelessly adrift on a tiny raft, surrounded by bodies in various states of decay. In the real story, the Medusa's inexperienced captain had literally cut his own lifeboat's ties with the makeshift raft, thus sealing the fate of many of his men. It was an act of callousness and cruelty that one critic said also reflected the monarchy of the time. A whole society is aboard the raft of the Medusa, he said in a better French accent than that. Love it or hate it, it was all so Jericho. Until he died in 1824 at the young age of 32, he was always interested in the human body as a machine of muscle and bone. According to his friend Alexandre Dumas, Jericho once used a mirror to observe an operation on his own back. A surgery to treat the very injury which would lead to his early death, in order to make, quote, an anatomical study on a live individual. medical books for centuries before the arrival of photography. And of course, this guy. But now that we have photographs, reference books, and medical texts, and everyone can find something to base their artsy corpsey project on, is there still a place for the use of actual corpses in art? And even if we as a collective culture are all for it, does the corpse get a say? Corpse consent? Let's ask all this and more as we explore the question, should human corpses be used for art? And if so, is there a right or wrong way to do so? And does the corpse ever get to... This is too long a question. Let's just begin. It's time for art. Let's talk the Western masters. Michelangelo, as you may or may not know, was a pretty good artist from Italy. As a master of anatomy, rivaling and even surpassing physicians of his day, Michelangelo acquired his knowledge of anatomy from countless dissections, many of which were criminals waiting to be buried by the Catholic Church. Though the desecration of a corpse was forbidden by the Church, criminals didn't really count. The Church essentially gave Michelangelo special permission to dissect all the bodies as long as they were given a proper burial afterward. But in his thirst to learn more about anatomy, Michelangelo was not above working with body snatchers or grave robbers. In his mind, this was all for the greater good. Said Michelangelo's biographer, quote, "There is no animal whose anatomy he would not dissect." Meaning he did have an intimate knowledge of the body that is seen in every aspect of his work. And while he may not have created sculptures of specific corpses, aside from Jesus, his knowledge of the human body came directly from corpses. They were his muse. Without corpses, Michelangelo wouldn't be Michelangelo. It was during the Renaissance that we started to see some very real-looking corpses depicted in art. No disrespect, of course, to the era before that, and my personal fave, the late medieval period.
The Middle Ages were magic.
Yeah, but here's what I mean about the Renaissance. Hans Holbein the Younger, in his 16th century The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb, portrayed Jesus as a realistically decomposing corpse. The circular wounds on his hands from the nails of the cross are putrefying green. His eyes roll blankly back into space, and he does not look like he has much of a chance for resurrection. I mean, I wish him the best, Son of God and all, but as Holbein depicts it, it's not looking good. Rembrandt painted an incredible 1632 scene of doctors dissecting the corpse of criminal Aris Kint after his hanging, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tull. A group of men lean in inquisitively as the corpse's tendons are presented for all to see. Some art historians have remarked how the navel of this corpse appears to look like a little capital R, perhaps a clever artist signature by Rembrandt. All of this raises the question of how much these artists are in debt to their dead muses. This is not a donate your body to science and art situation. This is a I just went to the morgue and took your body because you were destitute situation. These are masterpieces, but the models posed involuntarily. With so many bodies strewn across the history of art, it's worth considering the implications of using the dead in service to art. One side of the argument is this, that we can't apply our current cultural values to other cultures and even our own culture at different times in history. I say this all the time about death and death rituals. For example, take the great ossuaries of Europe, which don't just use the dead for art, they use the dead as art. In the 13th century, the Senlic Abbey in what's now the Czech Republic was the place to be buried. But by the 15th century, and over 40,000 bodies later, the cemetery could take no more. To allow for the burial, the bones were exhumed and put in the cemetery's chapel basement. And there they sat until 1870, when a woodcarver named Rint was tasked with arranging them into the Sedlick ossuary. The chapel is now decorated with stunning, next-level sculptural arrangements of thousands and thousands of bones. There's the Schwarzenberg family crest, the Schwarzenbergs being the noble family that bought the property in the 18th century, arranged in bone. There's Rent's signature, arranged in bone. Garlands of bones drape the walls and ceilings, and most famously, there's the chandelier, 8 feet high and containing almost every bone in the human body. To our modern sensibilities, the Celtic ossuary might seem exploitative, like dog tourism. You might say, those bones never consented to be dug up and used as art. Yes, but in the time the Sedgwick ossuary was constructed, ossuaries were not only practical as a place for remains to go when space was limited, but they were also places to memorialize people. They were respectful places, places to contemplate our mortality, memento mori. Or what about the art made of corpses? That's not really art per se, but for religious purposes. Take the bonkers, incredible, bejeweled skeletons you can still find in Germany and Austria. These are allegedly the remains of saints, which is why they get the bedazzled treatment. Catholics love their saints' relics and bones, but during the Protestant Reformation, Protestants were like, none of that, destroyed, gone city. Then, during the Counter Reformation, Catholicism too, back in the habit, Catholics in this area of the world wanted their saints back, but the relics had been destroyed. So, they opened up some of the catacombs in Rome and, found some. And that's where we got the crowns and wig and jewel tones, fabulous jewel tones. They remind us of what waits in the afterlife, but I think they were also just really happy to have their relics again. Or how about the modern day Yetitas in Bolivia? These skulls aren't usually relatives of the people who own them. They're found in cemeteries and medical schools and archaeological sites, and then adopted and used as no less than intermediaries to God. People can ask them for help with love, money, family. They aren't explicitly art, but are you telling me they aren't art? Because look at them. I don't want to hear it. So here's how we get to the other side of the argument. Is it somehow about artistic intention? That is, we're okay with corpses teaching us a profound religious lesson, or helping us with love and money, or inspiring the great artists of the past. But in the last few decades, do we need to be inspired by the message, to be inspired by the use of a dead body? Is it art if we, the viewer, say it is? And then hacky exploitation by a dude who wants to sell out and be a blue chip artist if it's not? Let's explore some modern examples. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a word from our sponsor. Did you think we had a real sponsor? Heavens no. Ladies, sometimes you just have to sponsor yourself. And that's why this video is brought to you by the brand new book, Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? Caitlin, isn't that just your new book? Sure is. It's out September 10th in the US and UK. But for 10 of you lucky ducklings, we're going to send you a signed copy a full week in advance of the book's release. But you have to live in the United States. Listen, I do not make these rules. You act like I have decided to personally hate Canada. No one hates Canada. Go Raptors. Here's what we need. Here in the YouTube comments or on any social media platform, pick from both. I want to see your favorite piece of death-related art. I want to know who the artist is, and by the way, the artist can be you, your little creative genius. Show us the art, and if it's on social media, tag it #CatEatEyeballs. That's #CatEatEyeballs, so that we can find it and pick the winners. May the art be ever in your favor. Now, back to regularly scheduled programming. So yes, modern examples. Take the American photographer Andres Serrano. You may recognize his name because of his infamous 1987 work, Piss Christ, which depicts a crucifix submerged in yellow liquid. People did not love it. Thought it was real blasphemous. So if you're the type of person who already doesn't like this guy, you might not be surprised that he also photographed details of dead bodies in morgues. And what about another American photographer, Joel Peter Witkin? Someone many of us love, used to love, still love, sometimes struggle with. Witkin incorporates dismembered pieces of corpses into works that meditate on death, and pairs these images of cadavers with marginalized living models like amputees and the disabled. Those who don't like him think Witkin is just controversy art, plain and simple. But those who do value his work find the black and white photographs beautiful and shocking, with lily flowers blooming out of a severed head, or an arm elegantly slumped over a clock. taking next to a bunch of grapes like a Vanitas painting, which, by the way, another well-established visual medium of death art. Again, the idea of consent is raised. His living models all pose with consent, but the dead don't. In the 1990s, Whitkin photographed the dead in the Mexico City morgue. He was actually present for the autopsy of the figure seen here in the 1994 Glass Man, a photograph in which an unnamed man's face is clearly visible above his autopsy sutures. His body is propped up in a seated position, and his hands are cradled in his lap. According to Whitkin, this man had been stabbed and left to die in the streets. I witnessed his passage, his transformation, Whitkin writes, and there was a kind of lightness coming from his body. They usually hose down the corpse after an autopsy, but I purposely had them leave the blood on him. So is it okay to use this dead man as unconsenting art, even if we find it beautiful? Or maybe it's being able to identify the man in the photograph that we find to be a problem. Can we take artistic inspiration or even perspiration from the corpse and have it be ethical? Since 2004, Teresa Margolles, a Mexican artist and morgue employee, has been creating pieces that force confrontation with the drug violence, murders, homelessness, and the death of young people in Mexico City. Margolles doesn't just use corpses from the morgue as a reference. The dead are in her art. By that, I mean she created a piece where the floor was mopped with a mixture of blood and water, so that a scab-like layer would form on the floor and stick to the soles of people's shoes. As Margolles said, they would be walking atop the remains of young people that were murdered in Mexico. Another installation by Margolles was called Vaporization. She took water used to wash corpses of drug cartel murder victims at the Central Morgue in Mexico City and ran that water through a fog machine and humidifier. Visitors were literally breathing in disinfected corpse water. In a similar installation, bubbles float around the room, daintily popping on people's skin. And where do you think the water for those bubbles came from? If you guessed the morgue, you'd be correct. Each bubble is a body, she said. Bubble. In the case of Margolles, you're breathing the body in, absorbing it, coming into contact with the dead. Death and violence is a part of life, and now it's a part of you. Now is really the time to start talking about what our ethics are around corpse art, because boundaries will continue to be pushed. The Scottish artist Christine Borland and an American artist Herbie Condon collaborated on an exhibition that proposed people donate their bodies for artistic purposes, with the corpses placed on a circular sculpture that would be marked by an imprinting of a body undergoing hypostasis. And in 2015, Icelandic artist Snorri Asmundsson put out a call for corpses for a video installation in which you dance with the dead. But so far, the collaboration seems to be on ice, like the corpses. So after hundreds of years of corpses in art, corpses being vital to the creation of art, does a right way and a wrong way become clear? I don't know. On the one hand, I'm all for the end to our only representation of the dead in popular culture being rosy-cheeked 25-year-old actors on the autopsy table. Look to the corpse. People would always look to the corpse. All our problems will be solved. But as much as we can appreciate what Michelangelo did for anatomy, gone are the days when we can pick and choose whose body will be disrespected and whose won't in the name of good intentions. What do you think, Deathlings? By the way, there's a whole other story about a Mexican architect's cremated remains diamond that we love but didn't quite fit in this video that I'm telling on camera over on Patreon. So join me then. This video was made with generous donations from death enthusiasts just like you. I have here a note to put on my beret. That's exciting. I'm putting on my beret so you can tell it's time for art. Should I just like wear a beret for the rest of the video? Cute or stupid? Maybe this is a beret craze. By the way, there's a there's a whole other story about it. There's a whole other story about a Mexican architect. No one hates Canada. Hashtag cat eat eyeballs. That's hashtag cat eat eyeballs. Corpses, corpses, corpses. Don't hear that one. I don't like it.
Growing up on the west side of Chicago when I was probably about 10 years old, my dad said to me, "You better learn how to swim." And I said, "Why should I learn how to swim?" He says, "Never mind, you learn how to swim. Otherwise, you'll live like people on the east side." Attitude within historical consciousness became years.
The tragedy of the Titanic needs no introduction. But what if I were to tell you that just 3 years later, right here in this spot in the Chicago River, another massive ship was found, killing more passengers than the Titanic, most of them young women and children. And the most pop culture attention it's gotten in recent years is this episode of the late 90s Disney TV show So Weird.
Well, maybe I hadn't heard the Eastern disaster.
What was what happened to all of the bodies? And perhaps strangest, why do we seem to have forgotten that it ever happened at all? Welcome to the Western Electric family. Our exciting new world needs exciting new technology. Here at Western Electric, your manufacturer and supply telephone service folks all over our great nation. At our Hawthorne plant, located just outside Chicago, we've created not a home away from home, but a home, period. A place to work, live, and play. Come join us. Bring the wife and kids with you. Western Electric. Everything you want from a career, everything you want from a community. Western Electric's Hawthorne plant was like the Google or Apple of 1950. Back at their Chicago plant, there was a little issue with violence as the workers demanded shorter days and better working conditions. So Western Electric naturally started looking for a place outside the city to accommodate more workers and less drama. The neighborhood of Hawthorne, 10 miles west of the city, seemed just right. Occupying 203 acres, the Hawthorne plant was like a town within a town, wrote Eastman researcher and author J. Bowen Singer. It was filled with neighbors, bonded by the fact that they were predominantly first or second generation Czech or Polish immigrants. The town within a town featured its own railroad station, athletic fields, company stores, gymnasia, ice cream parlors, laundries. Sure, working at Western Electric meant a grueling 6-day work week, but they tried to balance that with a culture that emphasized fun. The style of corporate work culture, perhaps not that different from where you work right now. But the foosball table, the on-tap kombucha, the nap pods. In this spirit of fun, an entertainment committee called the Hawthorne Club hosted an annual picnic. For one Saturday in the summer, all Hawthorne employees had the day off. Their only responsibility? Being fun in the sun. In 1915, the tickets were 75 cents, which got you on the boat to Michigan City, Indiana, for a day of relaxation, games, swimming, maybe a bit of flirting, and socializing. It was early morning, July 24th, 1915, here along the Chicago River. There was the normal bustling of produce vendors, warehouse workers, but joining them that Saturday morning were the employees of Western Electric and their friends and their family excited for the annual company picnic. It was right here that the SS Eastland was docked with 2,500 people waiting to board. We came here to the river with Ted Ruggles, the executive director of the Eastland Disaster Historical Society. As you'll see, Ted is both a historian and a passionate defender of the Eastland's memory. On that morning, the Eastland was docked loving Marianne commented she didn't like the feel of the East. Marianne grew up the daughter of a fisherman in Norway and spent a harrowing 2 weeks aboard a ship emigrating to America when Bobby was just a baby. Marianne had the feel for boats, and this one didn't feel right to her. She told her daughter, "There are too many people on this boat. Only 1 minute into boarding, the Eastland already starts to lean starboard, meaning towards the dock. Loading of the ship has to be put on hold in an attempt to fix the lean, known as a list. Less than 15 minutes later, she lists again, this time to port, away from the dock. On the Eastland, the ballast system was huge tanks in the bottom of the ship that would be emptied or filled with water in an attempt to keep the ship balanced. It was far from an exact science. It was the chief engineer's job to basically eyeball the tanks and fill them accordingly. What are the passengers thinking as their boat is slowly starting to lean to the side?
It's documented in historical records that the passengers kind of thought it was like an amusement ride. As it leaned towards the river, they go, ooh, and then when it rolls back and straightens, there's a ah that comes out from the crowd. Passengers are really unaware of what's about to happen.
At 7 a.m., they resumed boarding, and the leaning to port continued. But the order is still given to start the Eastland's engines. By 7:10 a.m., the Eastland reaches her capacity of 2,500 passengers and 70 crew. Over the next 10 minutes, the boat leans, rights itself, leans, rights itself. By 7:20 a.m., up on the wharf, the harbor master, Adam Weckler, notices the list and yells up to the Eastland's captain, Captain Pedersen, that he will not let him cast off unless the ship is brought back to even keel. But Captain Pedersen isn't worried. Wait, why wasn't he worried? He wasn't worried because he was extremely used to it. The SS Eastland was first launched in 1903, 12 years earlier. The ship had a reputation for being cranky, which didn't mean she was the Statler and Waldorf of the Great Lakes, but rather nautical lingo for being unstable in the water. She was built by the Jenks Shipbuilding Company, who typically built cargo ships. Cargo ships carry their stationary weight down low, but the Eastland was an excursion ship, meaning she carried her weight on the higher decks in the form of passengers. Over the years, the top heaviness of this boat only increased. After the Titanic sank, there was a movement to have more lifeboats on ships, a lifeboats for all movement, which made the Eastland even more top-heavy. Then they replaced some of her floors with concrete, which made her even more top-heavy. She wasn't designed well for passengers, but there was more money in passengers. There were countless incidents of the Eastland's wild instability over the years, and it was no secret. In 1910, the Eastland's owners took out a full-page ad in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, saying basically, "We'll give you $5,000 if you can prove the Eastland is dangerous." The ad called her the staunchest, fastest, and safest boat devoted to pleasure on the Great Lakes, before saying, essentially, "She has all these haters who know nothing about boats, trying to say she's not safe, and you cannot prevent it." The instability was so commonplace that morning on the Chicago River, Captain Pedersen continues right on preparing to depart, even as water is coming on to the main deck. By 7:27 a.m., the list is so great that passengers on the highest deck are asked to move starboard. But because of the now 40-degree list and the slippery deck, they can't move. The passengers do not panic. The Eastland band plays ragtime, and people try and stay lighthearted and joke about the ship's leak.
To this day, history remembers that it was a sudden rush of passengers to the riverside of the ship. Absolutely, that did not happen. Behold the transcripts from both the criminal trial and the civil trial. Every eyewitness testified under oath that they observed no sudden movement of passengers on the ship.
That's crucial. No sudden rush of passengers on the ship means no blaming the passengers sides were crushing the two men. Water is coming in from the gangway and from the quarters. Now the passengers definitely know something is wrong. Passengers raced for the main staircase, but the rush caused a deadly bottleneck that trapped, crushed, and would eventually drown many. According to the Chicago Tribune, this staircase is where most of the bodies were found. The lift is now at 75 degrees. People begin jumping off. Water keeps coming onto the ship, hastening the ship's roll. With a deafening snap, the piling that the ship is fastened to is ripped from the peak. Finally, in the moments before 7:30 a.m., the SS Eastland rolls onto her port side into the river, unceremoniously turning over, according to a nearby policeman, like an egg in the water. The Eastland came to rest in only 20 feet of water, 19 feet away from the wharf. Even the photos, the huge ship on its side seems strange, but somehow undramatic. But to those caught in her hole, flailing in the water, they may just as well have been in the middle of the ocean.
When it went over, if you can just imagine 1,000+ people all raining down your way, all of the debris, the boxes, the cases of beer, the refrigerator, the piano, all of that, all the people coming your way, people on the riverside of the ship virtually had no chance.
To the passengers trapped inside, the ship was described as a funhouse. Floors became walls, walls became ceilings, water rushed into the compartments, throwing furniture around. The Eastland was equipped with thousands of life preservers, but all of them were loaded up at the time of the disaster. The water was teeming with souls, inside and outside the ship. People clawing at people, fighting to stay afloat. They were dressed in their best clothes for a picnic, and in 1915, for women, that meant layers upon layers of heavy clothing. Even if a person were able to swim, and many could not, the weight threatened to drag them down or exhaust them. And even if you were able to tread water in the river, you may be dragged under by another person holding on to you desperately for dear life. One of the very few people located on the port side of the ship who survived was Jay Lee. He was floundering underwater, people grabbing at his hair, at his arms, and his legs. In a fight for his life, Brown admitted to kicking and punching those people off to find safety.
Probably some of the most poignant words came from his testimony, and he described that by saying, "No man is a hero underwater."
No man is a hero underwater. People in the buildings along the river watched in helpless horror. Merchants and workers on the wharf were heaving items into the river to act as flotation devices. Wooden boxes, ladders, egg crates, life preservers. Some of the wooden boxes bashed people in the head and sent them underwater. Hundreds of chicken coops were thrown in, with around 30 passengers being saved by the cooks. But with thousands of people, nothing seemed to be enough. One woman was described as setting her baby on a floating deck chair in the river, pushing it towards safety, blowing a kiss goodbye, and sinking beneath the dark water. Trapped inside the ship, between the cabin and promenade decks, were 13-year-old Bobby Onstad and her mother Marianne, the one who didn't like the feel of the ship. A strong swimmer, Bobby loved the water, and she was able to tread water despite feeling people grab at her from every direction. Bobby's uncle Olaf dived again and again beneath the black water, thick with sewage, oil, and debris, to rescue people and bring them to the surface. Olaf saved 27 people that day, staying to help even after he was eventually rescued. Bobby waited, with food, furniture, garbage, corpses floating around her, excruciating screams and pounding. The water continued to rise in her little pocket between decks. Water that was already disgusting, dumped in from the stockyards. That beautiful green water in our footage? Yeah, the river didn't look like that in 1915. Response to the disaster was both fast and slow. By the time the ship rolled, most of the crew had fled.